The bank said I owed $860,000 on a mortgage I never signed. Turns out my golden child sister used my name to buy her dream house. Tonight at her luxury celebration dinner, I am not bringing a gift. I am bringing a police report. My name is Stella, and I am 33 years old. I stood in the middle of my living room staring at the thick envelope from Chase Bank. My hands were actually shaking. As a forensic accountant, my entire career is built on tracking financial fraud, analyzing corporate ledgers, and maintaining an immaculate personal financial record. My professional clearance literally depends on it, but the document in my hands made absolutely no sense. It was a final notice of foreclosure. The letter stated that I was 3 months severely delinquent on a jumbo mortgage loan. The total debt outstanding was $860,000. I literally gasped out loud. I live in a rented apartment. I have never bought a house in my life. I dropped the letter on my kitchen island and practically attacked my laptop keyboard. I logged into my credit monitoring portal. The screen loaded, and my stomach completely dropped. My credit score, which I had painstakingly maintained at a perfect 810 for years, had plummeted to a disastrous 450 overnight. There were multiple hard inquiries, massive debt-to-income ratio alerts, and a giant red flag for a defaulted mortgage. I felt like I could not breathe. In modern America, a 450 credit score means you cannot rent a car, you cannot get an apartment, and in my field, you can easily lose your job. Someone had maliciously stolen my identity. I looked back down at the foreclosure notice, scanning the property details. The address was listed in a highly exclusive gated subdivision in Alpharetta, Georgia. The street name looked painfully familiar. I pulled out my phone and opened my text messages. 2 weeks ago, my younger sister, Brittany, had sent out a digital invitation for a lavish family dinner. She and her husband, DeAndre, had just purchased their dream home, and tonight was the big celebration. I clicked on the digital invite. The ornate gold lettering flashed on my screen, listing the address of their beautiful new estate. My blood ran completely cold. I looked at the bank notice. I looked at my sister's invitation. The addresses were an exact match. Brittany and DeAndre had not bought a house. They had stolen my identity to buy a house in my name, and now they were letting it go into foreclosure while throwing a party to celebrate themselves. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who thought they could walk all over you. Growing up, Brittany was always the golden child. Whatever she wanted, my parents made sure she got. When I moved out at 18 to work my way through college, my parents converted my bedroom into a walk-in closet for her. I spent the next 15 years building a flawless career and achieving absolute financial independence. Brittany spent those same years curating a fake wealthy aesthetic on social media, enabled by her husband, DeAndre. DeAndre is a senior mortgage broker who always seemed to live way beyond his actual commission checks. Now I knew exactly how he was funding their extravagant lifestyle. He had used his insider access and professional credentials to manipulate the banking system and forge a massive loan in my name. The panic I felt 20 minutes ago completely evaporated. In its place was a cold, calculated fury. They forgot what I do for a living. I did not cry. I did not call my mother to ask what was going on. I went to my home office, printed out the bank notices, pulled my full credit report, and placed everything neatly into a thick manila folder. I grabbed my car keys and headed straight to the local police precinct. I filed a formal report for aggravated identity theft and fraud. The desk officer handed me the official stamped copy of the police report. I slid it into the folder. By the time I pulled up to the valet at the upscale French restaurant in downtown Atlanta, my heart was beating in a slow, steady rhythm. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, I could see my family gathered around a private dining table. My parents, Richard and Patricia, were beaming with pride. Brittany was wearing a designer dress, holding up a glass of champagne, boasting to the waiter. DeAndre sat next to her, looking incredibly smug in a tailored suit, playing the role of the successful provider. They were laughing and celebrating a life built entirely on my stolen future. I handed my keys to the valet, gripped the folder tightly, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. I was ready. The maitre d' led me toward the back of the restaurant. As I approached the private alcove, my sister's high-pitched voice carried over the soft jazz music playing in the background. She was practically vibrating with excitement. And you should see the kitchen island, Brittany was saying, swirling a mimosa, even though it was 8 o'clock at night. The Italian marble countertops are custom imported. We told the contractor we wanted the exact same stone they used in that celebrity home magazine last month. It is absolutely flawless. My father nodded approvingly, raising his water glass. You two deserve it. You have worked so hard to build a beautiful life. I stopped at the edge of the table. The sheer audacity of the word worked almost made me laugh. I did not scream. I did not make a scene. I simply reached into my manila folder, pulled out the police report, and slid it directly over Brittany's empty bread plate. The bold black letters at the top read, "Aggravated identity theft." The table went completely silent. Brittany looked down at the paper. All the color drained from her face in an instant. Her perfect smile collapsed into a look of absolute terror. She looked up at me, then at DeAndre. DeAndre cleared his throat, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. He tried to put on his best professional charm, the same charm he probably used to scam his clients. Now, Stella, let us not overreact here. We can explain everything. This is just a misunderstanding with the paperwork. A misunderstanding. I kept my voice dead level. A bank is foreclosing on an $860,000 mansion in my name. My credit score is destroyed. That is not a paperwork error, DeAndre. That is a federal crime. Before DeAndre could formulate another lie, my mother scoffed. She actually rolled her eyes and tossed her napkin onto the table. Honestly, Stella, do you always have to be so dramatic? Patricia said, her voice dripping with irritation. Your sister is trying to celebrate a major milestone, and you come in here waving legal documents around like a crazy person. You are ruining a perfectly good evening. I stared at my mother, genuinely wondering if she had lost her mind. Mom, they stole my identity. They forged my signature on a mortgage. My mother waved her hand dismissively, exactly like she did when we were kids and Brittany broke one of my toys. Oh, stop using such ugly words. Nobody stole anything. They just borrowed your credit score for a little while to get the approval. DeAndre said he was going to refinance and take your name off the loan next year anyway. You did not even lock your credit, and you left your tax documents in your old bedroom, so it is partly your fault for leaving your information lying around the house. The room seemed to spin slightly. My own mother was victim blaming me for a massive financial fraud. You knew about this, I asked, looking between my parents. My father suddenly found his water glass. Very interesting, refusing to meet my eyes. Of course we knew, Patricia continued, sipping her wine, as if we were discussing the weather. You have been completely independent since you were 18, Stella. You make great money, you live in that nice apartment downtown, and you do not even need a house right now. You are single. Brittany is married and trying to start a family. Why can't you just let your sister use your good credit for a few years? It does not cost you anything. It costs me everything. I finally raised my voice just enough to make the neighboring tables glance over. My credit score is 450. I am thousands of dollars in debt on paper. I am a forensic accountant. Do you have any idea what happens when a financial firm sees a defaulted jumbo loan on my record? I could lose my security clearance. I could lose my job over this. Well, maybe if you were more supportive, they would not have had to go behind your back. My mother shot back, her tone turning venomous. We asked you to co-sign for them months ago, and you selfishly said no. What were they supposed to do? Give up on their dream home just because you are stingy? Families make sacrifices for each other. Stealing is not a sacrifice, I replied coldly. My father finally spoke up, offering a weak, pathetic defense. Stella, please, keep your voice down. We are in a public place. DeAndre is a professional. He knows how the system works. He was handling the payments. They just got a little behind because of the renovation costs. We can sort this out privately, without involving the authorities. I looked at the four of them sitting there. My sister clutching her designer bag bought with stolen money. My brother-in-law, arrogantly confident that his family ties would shield him from the law. And my parents entirely willing to sacrifice my career, my financial security, and my future just to give their golden child a marble kitchen island. They were not a family, they were parasites. I tapped my finger on the police report sitting in front of Brittany. The police have the report, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The bank has been notified of the fraud. I am not co-signing, I am not covering for you, and I am not dropping the charges. DeAndre let out a low, breathy chuckle. The charming professional facade he wore for my parents melted away in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating sneer. He leaned heavily across the table, his expensive cologne mixing awkwardly with the smell of the roasted garlic from my parents' plates. You really think you have me backed into a corner, don't you? DeAndre whispered, his tone dripping with condescension. You think because you crunch numbers for a living, you understand how the real world operates. Let me educate you, Stella. My parents sat there completely silent, happily letting this man intimidate their own daughter. Brittany had recovered slightly, taking a large gulp of her mimosa, a smug little smile creeping back onto her face as she watched her husband take control of the situation. I did not use a random computer to submit that loan application. DeAndre continued, his eyes locking onto mine with an intense, aggressive glare. I am a senior mortgage broker. I know exactly what the fraud department looks for. I used your old college laptop, the one you left in the basement here at your parents' house. I routed the entire application through the IP address tied to your childhood home. I stared at him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral, though my mind was racing. And the signatures, DeAndre smirked, leaning even closer, until I could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. E-signatures, completely authenticated. You left your old W-2 forms and tax returns sitting in your desk drawer upstairs. Your mother was more than happy to let me dig through them when I said I was helping you organize your finances. You did not have a credit freeze. You did not have two-factor authentication on your old email. As far as the bank is concerned, Stella applied for a loan from her family home using her own financial documents and approved the digital signatures herself. I kept my voice absolutely steady. You just confessed to wire fraud and identity theft. He laughed out loud this time, a sharp, arrogant sound that echoed in the quiet restaurant alcove. Who is going to believe you? The police. They are going to look at the IP address, they are going to look at the family connection, and they are going to classify this as a civil family dispute. Cops do not want to deal with messy family drama. They will tell you to take it to civil court. DeAndre leaned back in his chair, straightening his tie with an air of absolute victory. Do you even know how a jumbo loan works, Stella? The bank does not care about you. They care about the collateral. The house is the collateral. As long as I eventually make the payments, the bank will look the other way. They do not want a foreclosure on their books any more than you do. So they will sweep this under the rug. You are fighting a war you have already lost. He pointed a finger at me across the table. And if you decide to take me to civil court, I promise you I will drag this out for years. I know how the legal system works. I will file motion after motion. I will request endless continuances. I will bury you in so much legal paperwork that you will go bankrupt just paying your attorney fees. You will run out of money long before you ever see the inside of a courtroom. Brittany chimed in, her voice sickly sweet. Just let it go, Stella. DeAndre is going to refinance in a year or two anyway. If you make a big deal out of this, you are only going to ruin your own life. Do not be the reason our family falls apart. My mother nodded firmly in agreement. Listen to your sister. We are a family. We protect each other. If you go to the police again, you are no longer a part of this family. I looked at DeAndre. He actually thought he was a genius. He thought that because he worked in the mortgage industry, he possessed some secret, untouchable knowledge. He honestly believed that using an old laptop and forging electronic signatures made him an untraceable mastermind. But he was forgetting one crucial detail. I am a forensic accountant. My entire job is tearing apart complex financial webs woven by men much smarter than him. By using his broker credentials to push the loan through the system, he had not just committed standard identity theft. He had committed federal bank fraud. He had abused his fiduciary duty as a licensed financial professional. But I was not going to tell him that. Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. Are you done? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. DeAndre sneered. I am just getting started. If you do not withdraw that police report by tomorrow morning, I will make sure your life becomes a living nightmare. I will call your firm. I will tell them you are having a mental breakdown and filing false police reports against your own family. Let us see how long you keep your precious security clearance after that. I looked at my mother. She was staring at me with cold, hard eyes, waiting for me to back down and apologize. I looked at my father, who was cowardly cutting his steak, pretending this conversation was not happening. Finally, I looked at my sister, the golden child sitting in her designer dress, entirely comfortable with the fact that her husband was threatening to destroy my life over a house. I reached out and tapped the police report one last time. Enjoy your dinner, I said. And enjoy the house, while you still can. I turned around and walked out of the private alcove. I did not look back. I could hear my mother scoffing loudly behind me, complaining to the waiter about my terrible attitude. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. The arrogance of DeAndre was infuriating, but the immediate real-world consequences of his actions were about to crash down on me. The valet stand was tucked under the glowing awning of the restaurant. The thick, humid Atlanta air was already beginning to break heavy gray clouds rolling in overhead. A low rumble of thunder vibrated through the pavement. I handed my ticket to the young attendant in the red vest. That will be $20, ma'am, he said, turning to grab my keys from the lockbox. I reached into my purse and pulled out my primary credit card. It was a premium travel rewards card I had used for years, paid off in full every single month. I tapped it against the wireless reader. A sharp beep echoed and the screen flashed red. Declined. I frowned. That had never happened to me in my adult life. I assumed I must have triggered a fraud alert when I pulled my credit report earlier. I muttered a quick apology to the valet and pulled out my debit card tied to my checking account, which had a very comfortable safety net of savings. I inserted the chip. The machine processed for a few agonizing seconds before flashing red again. Insufficient funds or account frozen. The valet shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the line of expensive cars pulling up behind me. Would you like to try another card, ma'am? Or cash? I do not carry cash. My heart started to race. I stepped out of the way, gesturing for him to help the next customer while I pulled out my phone. I opened my mobile banking app. The screen loaded and the numbers that appeared made my breath catch in my throat. Available balance $0. A bright red banner spanned the top of the screen. Account restricted. Please contact customer service immediately. I clicked the alert, my hands shaking. The notification detailed that a massive lien had been flagged against my Social Security number. The bank had initiated a cross-institution freeze on my liquid assets due to an extreme risk of default on an $860,000 secured loan. DeAndre had not just ruined my credit score, he had triggered a catastrophic algorithmic response across the entire financial system. Banks do not wait for a judge to tell them you are a flight risk when nearly $1 million is on the line. They lock you out of your own life to secure their interests. A fat drop of rain hit my phone screen, then another. The sky opened up and the humid air turned into a torrential downpour. I looked at the valet. He was holding my keys, waiting for payment. I had absolutely nothing to give him. I could not even call a rideshare service because my accounts were locked. The app would instantly reject the charge. I was a senior forensic accountant making 6 figures standing outside a luxury restaurant entirely destitute. Keep the car parked here overnight. I told the valet, my voice barely audible over the crashing rain. I will pick it up tomorrow. I turned and walked away from the glowing awning, stepping directly into the storm. My apartment was 3 miles away. Under normal circumstances, it would be a 10-minute drive. Tonight, it was a brutal, punishing march. The rain soaked through my blazer within seconds, plastering my hair to my face and chilling me to the bone. Every step I took in my saturated work heels sent a sharp pain shooting up my calves. As I walked along the slick, dark sidewalks, cars rushed past, splashing dirty street water against my legs. This was the reality of a destroyed financial identity in modern America. We like to think we are in control of our lives, but we are completely tethered to an invisible web of data. Your credit score dictates where you live, what you drive, and how you are treated by society. With a 450 credit score, I was no longer Stella, the respected professional. To the algorithms that ran the world, I was a high-risk liability, a deadbeat, a thief. My family sat warm and dry in that restaurant, laughing and toasting to their stolen marble countertops, while I was locked out of my own hard-earned money, walking miles in a thunderstorm. DeAndre thought he was so clever. He thought the system he manipulated would crush me into submission. He assumed that freezing my resources would leave me helpless and desperate enough to drop the charges just to survive. I finally reached the lobby of my apartment building, shivering violently, leaving a trail of water across the pristine tile floor. The night concierge gave me a startled look, but I ignored him and stepped into the elevator. I leaned my wet head against the cold, mirrored wall. I had never felt so physically miserable or financially vulnerable in my entire life. But as the elevator chimed at my floor, the despair began to harden into something else, something unbreakable. They had taken my credit. They had taken my money. They had even taken my car, but they had not taken my mind. And by tomorrow morning, my family was going to learn exactly why you never steal from a woman whose literal job is destroying financial criminals. Monday morning arrived with a blinding glare reflecting off the wet Atlanta pavement. I had barely slept. I spent Sunday night wrapped in a blanket, drinking black coffee, mapping out exactly how I was going to dismantle DeAndre's fraudulent mortgage application. I put on my sharpest suit, pulled my hair back into a tight bun, and took the commuter train into the financial district, since my car was still held hostage by a frozen bank account. I needed the powerful forensic software on my office terminal. I was ready to go to war. I walked into the towering glass atrium of my firm, a prestigious accounting group that audited Fortune 500 companies. I grabbed a coffee from the lobby cafe, paid with the spare change I scraped from my kitchen drawer, and stepped into the executive elevator. I pressed the button for the 42nd floor where the Secure Investigative Division was located. When the doors opened, I walked confidently toward the reinforced glass doors of my department and swiped my employee badge against the scanner. Instead of the familiar green light and soft click of the lock releasing, the scanner flashed a harsh, solid red. Access denied. I frowned and wiped the badge on my sleeve, thinking the magnetic strip was dirty. I swiped it again. Red. Stella, a voice called out from behind me. I turned to see David, our firm's director of compliance, standing next to a stern-looking woman from Human Resources. David did not have his usual friendly morning smile. His face was completely impassive, his hands folded in front of him. "Your badge has been deactivated," David said, his voice low and formal. "We need you to come downstairs to the Human Resources office immediately." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I followed them back into the elevator, the silence thick and suffocating. Neither of them spoke a word until we were seated in a small, windowless conference room on the 10th floor. The HR director opened a thick manila folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. It looked terrifyingly similar to the foreclosure notice I had received just 24 hours ago. "Stella, we received an automated alert from our continuous monitoring system at 3 o'clock this morning." David began crossing his arms. As a senior forensic accountant, handling highly sensitive corporate funds, maintaining a flawless personal credit profile is a strict condition of your employment and your federal security clearance. I looked down at the paper. It was an internal compliance report. The massive red bar across the top indicated a critical security failure. "Your credit score dropped 360 points over the weekend," the HR director stated flatly. The system flagged a massive delinquent debt of $860,000 on a jumbo mortgage in default, along with multiple account freezes. "Stella, a financial anomaly of this magnitude makes you an extreme liability. It flags you as a high risk for corporate embezzlement." I leaned forward, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. David, this is a case of aggravated identity theft. I did not take out that loan. My brother-in-law is a mortgage broker, and he fraudulently used my personal information to secure a house for himself and my sister. I filed a police report last night. I am already taking legal action to clear my name. I reached into my briefcase, pulling out the copy of the police report I had shown my family the night before, and handed it to him. David reviewed it carefully, but his expression did not soften. He handed the report to the HR director before looking back at me with genuine regret. I believe you, Stella David said softly. You have been a stellar employee for 5 years, but you know our industry regulations. Protocol is protocol. A police report is just an accusation. Until a federal or civil court officially rules this as fraud, wipes the debt from your record, and restores your credit score to the required minimum of 750, your security clearance is legally compromised. We cannot allow you access to client financial data. The HR director folded her hands on the table. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending the resolution of this investigation. Furthermore, because this is a suspension related to a breach of your security clearance requirements, it is without pay. We need you to surrender your company phone and laptop. Security will escort you out of the building. The words echoed in my head like a physical blow. Suspended. Without pay. Escorted out by security. In less than 24 hours, DeAndre and my sister had not just stolen my credit score, they had effectively destroyed my career. I handed over my company devices feeling completely hollowed out. Everything I had worked for since I was 18 years old, every late night studying every promotion was being stripped away from me because my family wanted a custom Italian marble kitchen island. As the security guard walked me through the main lobby and out onto the bustling city street, the sheer scale of the disaster settled over me. I had no access to my bank accounts. I had no car. Now I had no income, and I had lost access to the professional software I needed to investigate DeAndre quickly. He had successfully cut off every single one of my lifelines. I stood on the sidewalk watching the corporate crowd rush past me, completely invisible to the world. DeAndre thought he had won. He thought stripping me of my resources would force me to crawl back to my parents and beg for forgiveness, exactly like my mother predicted. He thought I would drop the charges just to survive. He was wrong. Stripping me of my job did not make me desperate. It gave me something far more dangerous. It gave me free time. I did not go back to my apartment. I walked straight to the nearest transit station and caught a bus headed toward the affluent suburbs where I grew up. My parents lived in a pristine colonial-style house with a perfectly manicured lawn, a house built on appearances and buried secrets. I was going to give them one final opportunity to make this right before I burned everything to the ground. When I arrived, I used my spare key to unlock the heavy oak front door. My parents were sitting in the sunroom drinking iced tea and looking over a catalog for nursery furniture. They looked up, startled by my sudden appearance in the middle of a Monday morning. "Why are you not at work?" my father Richard asked, lowering his reading glasses. I stepped into the room, my wet shoes squeaking slightly on the hardwood floor. "Because I was just escorted out of the building by security," I said, my voice eerily calm. My firm ran a compliance check. They saw the massive defaulted loan in my name and the plummeting credit score. I have been suspended without pay. I have lost my security clearance, and I am on the verge of losing my entire career. My mother, Patricia, set her glass down with a sharp clink. "Well, I hope you are happy, Stella. This is exactly what happens when you start stirring up unnecessary drama. If you had just kept your mouth shut and co-signed like a supportive sister, none of this would have happened." I ignored her and looked directly at my father. "You are going to call Brittany and DeAndre right now. You are going to make them list that house for sale today. They need to liquidate the property, pay off the $860,000 loan, and clear my name. If they do that, I will tell the police it was a misunderstanding. I will drop the charges. This is their only way out, and it is my only way to get my job back." My father sighed heavily, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Stella, be reasonable. They cannot sell the house. Why not? I demanded. It is stolen property. Because Brittany is pregnant, he blurted out. The room fell dead silent. My mother nodded proudly, entirely ignoring the fact that my life was in ruins. She is 2 months along, Patricia added. She needs a stable environment. She needs the extra bedrooms for the baby and a proper yard. We cannot force a pregnant woman out of her dream home just because you are having a little hiccup at work. A little hiccup, I repeated, genuinely astounded by their delusion. I have zero income. My bank accounts are frozen. I cannot even buy groceries right now. How exactly am I supposed to survive while they play house with my identity? I need an attorney to fight the bank, and I cannot even afford a consultation fee. My father shifted uncomfortably in his wicker chair. He looked at my mother, sharing a quick, guilty glance before turning back to me. Actually, about the attorney situation. We wanted to talk to you about that. My stomach tightened. What about it? Your mother and I realized that things might get legally complicated since you went ahead and filed that police report against your own family. Richard began choosing his words carefully. We want to protect the baby. We cannot have DeAndre going to jail or Brittany dealing with stress. So we went ahead and hired a very good defense lawyer this morning, just to represent them in case you refuse to drop this ridiculous crusade. You hired a defense attorney for the people who stole my identity. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. With what money? My father cleared his throat, looking away. We used the $50,000 savings fund, the one we set aside for your future wedding. I felt as though the floor had literally dropped out from underneath me. That fund was established by my grandfather before he died. It was supposed to be my safety net. My parents had absolute control over the account, and they had always promised it would be there for my wedding or my first home down payment. You took my money, the money Grandpa left for me to hire a lawyer to defend the man who committed federal fraud against me. It is technically our money until we give it to you. Patricia snapped, instantly defensive. And since you are not engaged and clearly not buying a house anytime soon, we decided the family needed it more. DeAndre is providing us with our first grandchild. He needs protection from your selfish accusations. The sheer scale of the betrayal was paralyzing. They were not just taking Brittany's side. They were actively funding my destruction. They had taken the last financial resource I had in the world and handed it to the criminals who ruined me. I looked at my father, the man who was supposed to protect me. I looked at my mother, who was casually browsing cribs while my life collapsed. In that exact moment, the last lingering thread of familial duty inside me snapped. The daughter who wanted their approval died right there in that sunroom. I understand, I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or hesitation. Enjoy the new grandchild. I turned around and walked out of the house. I did not slam the door. I did not yell. I simply walked down the driveway with absolute clarity. They had drawn the battle lines. They had chosen to fund a criminal. Now it was time for me to do what I do best. It was time to follow the money. The walk from my parents' driveway to the bus stop felt different this time. The crushing weight of betrayal that had suffocated me all morning was completely gone. In its place was a sharp, icy focus. My mother thought I was just throwing a tantrum. My father thought I would eventually fold to keep the peace. DeAndre thought he had outsmarted me by cutting off my access to my corporate firm. They all severely misunderstood the situation. I was not a helpless victim crying over a stolen credit score. I was a senior financial investigator who had spent the last decade tearing apart multi-million-dollar corporate fraud rings. They had just picked a fight with the absolute worst person on the planet to steal from. I rode the bus back to my apartment building, my mind already organizing the data. When I walked through my front door, the silence of my apartment felt welcoming. I went straight to my home office. Human Resources had confiscated my company laptop, but any forensic accountant worth their salary maintains a private, heavily encrypted workstation for independent research. I pulled a heavy black laptop from the hidden compartment in my desk, plugged it in, and booted up my secure operating system. DeAndre thought he was untouchable because he worked from the inside. He assumed that because the bank approved the loan, the trail was clean. But fraud is never clean. It is a messy, arrogant process. Criminals like DeAndre always make the same fatal mistake. They get greedy and they get lazy. I poured myself a glass of ice water, cracked my knuckles, and opened my primary investigative software. It was time to launch a shadow investigation into my brother-in-law. I started with the basics. I accessed the county property tax database and pulled the official deed for the $860,000 house in Alpharetta. There it was, clear as day. My name, Stella, listed as the sole legal owner. DeAndre had not even bothered to put his or Brittany's name on the deed, likely because their own debt-to-income ratios were too disastrous to pass any level of secondary underwriting. He had completely isolated the asset in my name to protect himself. But by doing so, he had unwittingly given me absolute unchecked legal authority over the property. Next, I dug into his professional life. I pulled up the state licensing board for mortgage brokers and ran DeAndre's credentials. His license was active, tied to a mid-sized brokerage firm in downtown Atlanta. I opened a new window and started pulling public records on the firm itself. I cross-referenced the firm's state tax filings, its registered agents, and its history of incorporated shell companies. If DeAndre was bold enough to forge an entire jumbo loan application for a family member, he was definitely running other scams. You do not wake up one morning and decide to commit high-level federal bank fraud for the very first time on an $860,000 luxury property. You work your way up to it. You test the waters. You build a system. And I was going to find his system. I used a specialized data scraping tool to pull all the public real estate transactions DeAndre had brokered over the last 36 months. Hundreds of rows of data flooded my screen. Addresses, loan amounts, closing dates, and borrower names. I began running algorithms to filter the data, looking for the specific anomalies that indicate mortgage fraud. I searched for rapid title transfers, heavily inflated appraisals, and unusual patterns in the demographic data of his clients. The sun began to set over the Atlanta skyline outside my window, casting long shadows across my desk. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I just sat in the glow of the monitors, my eyes scanning line after line of financial data. The deeper I dug into DeAndre's portfolio, the more the numbers began to tell a story. I noticed a pattern. Over the past 2 years, DeAndre had originated a strangely high number of complex refinance loans for elderly clients. In almost every case, the properties had significant equity, but the new loan terms were incredibly predatory. The funds were being dispersed into a web of obscure business entities before allegedly paying off the original mortgages. I clicked on one of the corporate entities, tracing its registration back through the Georgia Secretary of State database. The registered agent was a post office box in a strip mall, but the originating digital fingerprint for the filing traced back to a server leased by DeAndre's brokerage firm. I leaned back in my chair, the icy focus sharpening into a razor edge. DeAndre was not just an entitled husband trying to buy a massive house for his pregnant wife. He was operating a sophisticated equity skimming operation. He was systematically targeting vulnerable people, draining the wealth from their homes and laundering the proceeds through fake companies. My forged loan was just the tip of a massive rotting iceberg. I took a slow sip of my water. The game had completely changed. This was no longer a domestic dispute over a ruined credit score. This was a federal financial crimes case waiting to be blown wide open, and I was holding the match. I set my glass down and pulled up the original deed for the property from the county clerk's online portal. If I was going to hand DeAndre over to the federal government, I needed an airtight case. The FBI does not act on vague suspicions or angry family disputes. They act on irrefutable paper trails. I zoomed in on the final page of the digitized deed, specifically looking at the notary stamp. Every real estate transaction in the United States requires a licensed notary public to physically verify the identity of the person signing the documents. They have to check your driver's license and watch you sign the paper in real time. Since I was never in the room, someone had to have broken the law to stamp that document. The blue ink stamp on the screen belonged to a woman named Cynthia Wallace. I opened a new browser tab and accessed the Georgia Superior Court Clerks Cooperative Authority, which is the official database for all registered notaries in the state. I typed in her name and her unique commission number. The search result came back in bright red text. Revoked. Cynthia Wallace had her notary commission permanently revoked 3 years ago for failing to maintain proper logbooks and participating in shady real estate closings. DeAndre had not just forged my signature. He had paid off a disgraced, unlicensed notary to fraudulently authenticate a federal banking document. That single act alone was a felony punishable by years in prison. But that was just the mechanical side of the fraud. I needed to understand the financial mechanics. A forensic accountant makes a comfortable 6-figure salary, but an $860,000 jumbo loan requires an incredibly low debt-to-income ratio and usually a massive cash down payment. Modern underwriting algorithms are ruthless. How on earth did he convince a major institution like Chase Bank that I was liquid enough to comfortably afford a $6,000 monthly mortgage payment? I used my secure private portal to run a deep background check on my own social security number, pulling data from alternative credit bureaus and automated employment verification services like The Work Number. When the specialized report generated on my screen, I almost laughed out loud at the audacity of it. According to the data brokers, I did not just work full-time at my accounting firm. I was apparently also a highly paid logistics consultant for an entity called Apex Logistics Group, earning an additional $150,000 a year in bonus income. I had never heard of Apex Logistics Group in my entire life. I switched back to the Secretary of State database and ran a corporate search for the company name. It was registered as a domestic limited liability company. I clicked on the filing history and opened the original articles of organization. The registered address was the exact same strip mall post office box I had found earlier when tracing his other loans. The organizing member was listed as a man named Jamal Davis. I cross-referenced the name Jamal Davis with the employee directory of DeAndre's mortgage brokerage firm on LinkedIn. Bingo. Jamal Davis was a junior loan processor working directly under DeAndre. The entire sophisticated scheme unraveled right in front of my eyes. DeAndre and his team had fabricated an entirely fake employment history to artificially inflate my income profile. They created a ghost company, generated fake pay stubs, and probably even routed a few deposits through my old dormant bank accounts, using my stolen routing numbers just to create a solid paper trail for the automated underwriting software. Then they used an unlicensed notary to finalize the closing paperwork. It was a completely closed loop of mortgage fraud executed flawlessly from inside a licensed brokerage. I sat back and rubbed my temples, staring at the glowing monitors. This was exponentially worse than I originally thought. My parents had told me that DeAndre just borrowed my credit score for a little while, acting like he had simply co-signed a used car loan. They had absolutely no idea about the terrifying depth of his criminality. Or maybe they did not care. As long as Brittany got her custom nursery and her imported marble countertops, they were perfectly willing to let me take the fall for a massive criminal enterprise. I spent the next 4 hours downloading every single document, every revoked notary log, every LLC registration, and every fake pay stub I could find. I organized them into meticulously labeled digital folders. I created complex visual flowcharts mapping the direct connections between DeAndre Jamal Davis, the fake consulting firm, and the disgraced notary public. I was building a prosecution binder that would make an assistant United States attorney weep with joy. My phone buzzed on my desk, vibrating loudly against the wood. The sudden noise startled me in the quiet, dark apartment. I glanced at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Brittany. Given the sheer volume of federal evidence I had just compiled against her husband, seeing her name pop up made my blood boil. I picked up the phone and opened the message. It was not an apology. It was an invitation. It was not an apology. It was an invitation. The screen of my phone illuminated my dark office with a brightly colored digital flyer covered in gold glitter pink bows and blue ribbons. The elegant script across the top read, DeAndre and Brittany's luxury housewarming, and gender reveal extravaganza. Beneath the ridiculous graphic was a text message from my sister. It read, Stella. Mom said you are still throwing a fit about the mortgage thing and got yourself suspended from work. Please grow up and stop being so bitter. It is my special day, and you need to come support the family. I am not letting your jealousy ruin this for me. I stared at the message, completely mesmerized by her breathtaking delusion. She had stolen my identity, ruined my credit, cost me my career, and her biggest concern was that my perfectly justified anger might somehow put a damper on her party. She honestly believed that her pregnancy gave her absolute immunity from the law and from basic human decency. I did not reply. Instead, I picked up my phone and opened the TikTok app. Brittany had always desperately wanted to be a lifestyle influencer. She constantly posted about her daily routines, her outfits, and her supposed wealth. If there was a massive housewarming party coming up, I knew there would be content. I typed in her handle and went to her profile. Right at the top of her page was a brand new video posted less than 2 hours ago. The caption read, "Tour my dream home with me, plus a sneak peek at the baby's room." I pressed play. The video started with Brittany standing in the grand 2-story foyer of the Alpharetta house. She was holding a designer coffee cup, beaming at the camera. She walked her followers through the open-concept living space, specifically stopping to aggressively tap her perfectly manicured nails against the custom Italian marble kitchen island she had bragged about at dinner. Then the video cut to the second floor. Brittany pushed open a set of double French doors. "And here is the piece de resistance," she squealed. The camera panned around a massive nursery. It was sickeningly lavish. There were custom hand-painted murals on the walls, a genuine crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling, and an imported European smart crib sitting in the center of the room. "DeAndre completely spoiled us," Brittany cooed into the microphone. "We dropped $30,000 just on this room alone. Only the absolute best for our little angel." $30,000. My forensic mind immediately went to work snapping the pieces of the financial puzzle together. Chase Bank was foreclosing on the property because the mortgage was 3 months severely delinquent. The monthly payment on an $860,000 loan with current interest rates was roughly $6,000. They owed the bank $18,000 in back payments. They had the cash to save the house, but instead of paying the mortgage, they fraudulently took out. In my name, they blew $30,000 on cosmetic nursery upgrades just to flex for strangers on the internet. I did not feel a single ounce of familial guilt anymore. I was looking at cold, hard, admissible evidence. In federal financial crime cases, proving criminal intent can sometimes be the most difficult hurdle for prosecutors. Defense attorneys will often argue that their clients made honest mistakes or suffered unexpected financial hardships. But a high-definition video of the perpetrators actively flaunting a lavish lifestyle funded by wire fraud is an absolute slam dunk. I immediately opened my screen recording software. I captured the entire home tour video, but I did not stop there. I scrolled back through her feed over the last 3 months, downloading everything. I saved a video of DeAndre showing off a brand new diamond watch he bought to celebrate closing a big deal. I archived clips of my mother in the background of the house, helping Brittany unbox expensive designer furniture, proving my parents were actively enjoying the stolen property. I cataloged every single post by date, time, and URL. I embedded the video files directly into my digital prosecution binder. I was building an ironclad narrative of greed. They were not struggling parents making a desperate mistake. They were arrogant thieves enjoying the fruits of a federal crime, publicly documenting their own guilt for the entire world to see. I picked up my phone and looked back at Brittany's text message. She wanted me to stop being bitter. She wanted me to come support the family. I typed out a very brief, polite response. "I will be there." It was the truest thing I had said all week. I was absolutely going to attend that housewarming party. But I was not bringing a gift registry item or a bottle of expensive champagne. I was bringing a reckoning. I tossed my phone onto the desk. The digital invitation to my sister's extravagant party faded to black. The anger that had been simmering in my chest morphed into something entirely different. It was an absolute razor-sharp clarity. I had a deadline now. The party was scheduled for this upcoming Saturday. I had exactly 5 days to construct a cage so tight that DeAndre would never see the outside of a federal penitentiary again. I turned my attention back to my encrypted laptop. If DeAndre had used Apex Logistics Group and that disgraced notary to fabricate my loan, he had undoubtedly used them before. A criminal system that's sophisticated is never built for a single use. It is built for scale. I ran a new data scraping script through the public records database. I specifically instructed the software to search for any property deed or mortgage document registered in the state of Georgia over the last 36 months that contained both the notary stamp of Cynthia Wallace and a financial link to Jamal Davis or his fake logistics company. I hit execute and waited. The progress bar on my screen filled up. A list of results populated. 1, 2, 3, 6. There were exactly 6 other properties listed. I opened the first file. The borrower was listed as a man named Harold Jenkins. I ran his name through a basic public directory. Harold was 78 years old. I opened the second file. Margaret Sullivan, 81 years old. I went down the list rapidly. Every single borrower was a senior citizen. My heart pounded against my ribs as I traced the financial routing numbers. DeAndre was a predator. He was specifically targeting elderly clients who came to his brokerage seeking reverse mortgages or simple refinances to help with their retirement or medical bills. These were people with excellent credit and homes that were fully paid off. They trusted him implicitly to handle their life savings. Instead of helping them, he was stealing their identities just like he had stolen mine. I mapped out the exact mechanics of his scheme on my digital whiteboard. DeAndre would originate massive cash-out refinance loans in their names without their knowledge. Because these victims were older and likely not monitoring their credit reports digitally, they had no idea massive loans were being processed. He used the fake notary to forge their signatures on the closing documents. When the bank dispersed the hundreds of thousands of dollars in home equity, DeAndre would intercept the funds. He routed massive kickbacks disguised as consulting and processing fees right into the bank accounts of Apex Logistics Group. Then he would make the bare minimum monthly payments on the new loans from a shell account just to keep the banks from noticing the default. He was skimming the massive equity off the top to fund his designer watches, his luxury cars, and my sister's $30,000 nursery, while leaving these elderly victims with massive secret debts attached to their homes. I pulled out my calculator and added up the total loan amounts across all 6 properties. $5.4 million. Combined with my $860,000 jumbo loan, DeAndre was sitting at the center of a $6 million criminal enterprise. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly what these numbers meant. This was no longer just a case of aggravated identity theft. By using interstate banking wires to defraud multiple victims through an organized group of accomplices, DeAndre had crossed a massive legal threshold. This was a direct violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was a federal RICO case. The FBI does not just arrest people for RICO violations. They seize their assets, they freeze their accounts, they completely dismantle their entire lives and lock them away for decades. My parents had begged me to keep the peace. They had accused me of ruining the family over a simple mistake. They used my grandfather's money to hire a defense attorney to protect a man who was systematically destroying the lives of innocent retirees. My mother wanted to protect her grandchild's stable environment, but that environment was built on the stolen retirement funds of an 80-year-old widow. They were complicit in funding a monster. I saved the final batch of documents to my encrypted drive. The evidence was overwhelming and perfectly organized. I had the bank routing numbers, the forged signatures, the fake company registrations, and the exact IP addresses used to submit the fraudulent applications. I leaned back and looked at the clock. It was past 2 a.m. DeAndre thought his biggest problem was an angry sister-in-law with a bruised credit score. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed a completely packaged multi-million-dollar federal racketeering case to an auditor with nothing left to lose. The morning sun crept through my office blinds, casting sharp lines across the stacks of printed evidence covering my desk. I had not slept a single minute, but my mind was operating with terrifying clarity. I looked at the original police report I had filed on Sunday night. DeAndre was right about one thing. Local law enforcement is chronically underfunded and overwhelmed. To a precinct detective, my forged signature looked like a messy family dispute over real estate, exactly the kind of civil case they hate to touch. Even if they eventually investigated, it would take months to get a subpoena. DeAndre would have plenty of time to destroy the server logs, dissolve Apex Logistics Group, and move the stolen equity into offshore bank accounts. I needed a tactical strike. I needed an agency with the jurisdiction to cross state lines, seize assets without warning, and freeze a multi-million-dollar racketeering ring overnight. I spent Tuesday morning formatting the raw data into a pristine, 200-page forensic dossier. I approached it exactly like I would a high-stakes corporate audit for a major corporate client. I created an executive summary that outlined the entire criminal mechanism in plain English. I detailed the initial identity theft, the creation of the fake tax documents, the utilization of the revoked notary Cynthia Wallace, and the systematic targeting of the 6 elderly homeowners. I included the routing numbers for every single illicit wire transfer made by DeAndre and Jamal Davis. Behind the executive summary, I attached the raw proof. I included the property deeds, the fake company registrations, the digital timestamps from his brokerage firm, and the exact internet protocol addresses used to submit the fraudulent applications. I even transcribed the video tours Brittany had posted online, cataloging every luxury purchase as undeniable evidence of money laundering and the enjoyment of criminal proceeds. I printed everything on high-quality paper, organized it with color-coded tabs, and bound it into 3 thick, heavy binders. My first stop was the federal field office in downtown Atlanta. Walking into a federal building is an entirely different experience than visiting a local police precinct. The air is sterile, the security is intense, and the people behind the bulletproof glass do not smile. I approached the front desk, slid my corporate identification under the glass, and asked to speak with the duty agent for the white-collar crime division. The receptionist looked at me skeptically. Federal agents do not typically take walk-in appointments. Tell them a suspended forensic accountant just mapped out a $6 million mortgage fraud and racketeering violation operating out of a licensed brokerage, I said, keeping my voice calm and authoritative. And tell them I have the exact bank routing numbers for the stolen funds. 10 minutes later, a man in a crisp suit escorted me into a secure interview room. He introduced himself as Special Agent Harrison. He looked exhausted, likely buried under a mountain of his own cases. He sat down and opened the first binder. I watched his eyes scan the executive summary. I fully expected him to skim the first page and tell me he would look into it later. Instead, he stopped. He flipped to the section detailing the elderly victims. Then he flipped to the financial flowcharts tracing the money through the fake logistics company. The exhaustion in his face vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a predator that just caught the scent of blood. "You built this entire case file yourself?" Special Agent Harrison asked, looking up at me with genuine surprise. "I am a forensic accountant," I replied. "The primary suspect is my brother-in-law. He stole my identity to secure an $860,000 jumbo loan, and in the process of investigating my own ruined credit, I uncovered the rest of his network. Everything you need for a federal wire fraud and bank fraud indictment is in those binders." I did not stop there. I reached into my bag and pulled out the second identical binder. The Federal Bureau is powerful, but when you want to absolutely annihilate a financial criminal, you call the people who collect the taxes. This copy is going to the Criminal Investigation Unit of the Federal Tax Authority, I informed him. DeAndre has been funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen equity through shell companies to fund his personal lifestyle. He definitely has not claimed that stolen money as taxable income. So even if he somehow manages to stall your wire fraud charges, the tax authorities will completely seize his assets for tax evasion. The government does not care where the money comes from as long as they get their cut. And DeAndre was arrogant enough to buy $30,000 custom nurseries while stiffing the federal government. Special Agent Harrison actually smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile. He closed the binder and rested his hands on top of it. He told me that his division had actually been receiving quiet complaints about DeAndre's brokerage firm for the past 6 months, but they lacked the internal paper trail to secure a search warrant. My 200-page dossier was exactly the golden key they needed to tear his operation apart. "We are going to expedite this," Special Agent Harrison said, standing up to shake my hand. "Do not confront him. Do not tell your family. Let him think he has gotten away with it. We need him comfortable while we get the federal warrants signed." I left the federal building and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The trap was officially set. DeAndre and Brittany thought they were untouchable in their stolen mansion. They had no idea a federal storm was gathering right above their heads. But calling the authorities was only the first part of my plan. Criminal charges would put him in prison, but I needed to personally ensure their precious housewarming party was a total disaster. I pulled out my phone and looked up the contact information for my new property's utility providers. Since DeAndre had so graciously put the entire deed exclusively in my name, I was the only person with the legal authority to keep the lights on. I sat in the driver's seat of my parked car outside the federal building, staring at the screen of my phone. DeAndre thought isolating the deed entirely in my name was his ultimate shield. He assumed it would protect his own assets if the fraudulent loan ever went south. But in his extreme arrogance, he had handed me the master key to his entire life. When you are the sole legal owner of a property, you control the infrastructure. And I was about to systematically dismantle my sister's dream house wire by wire and pipe by pipe. I started with the power grid. I looked up the customer service number for Georgia Power and dialed. A cheerful, automated voice prompted me through the menu until I reached a live representative. The woman on the line asked for the account number or the service address. I gave her the address of the Alpharetta Mansion. "I can help you with that," the representative said politely. "I just need to verify the account holder's identity. Can I have the last 4 digits of the Social Security number on file?" I rattled off my own Social Security number without missing a beat. Since DeAndre had used all my authentic financial data to set up the house, the utility accounts were naturally registered under my identity. It was the only way he could get the services connected without raising red flags at the utility companies. "Thank you, Stella," the representative said, completely oblivious to the domestic warfare she was about to facilitate. "How can I assist you today? Are you looking to pay your balance?" "No," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "I am the property owner, and I need to request a complete disconnection of service. A hard shutoff at the meter." The representative paused, clearly typing on her keyboard. "Oh, I see. Are you moving out? We can transfer your service to a new address if you would like." "I am not transferring service," I clarified. "I am evicting unauthorized tenants, and the property will be sitting vacant. I need the power entirely cut. I want the disconnection scheduled for this Saturday morning exactly at 10 o'clock. I chose that specific time for a reason. Brittany's digital invitation stated that her luxury housewarming party started at noon. The caterers, the florists, and the decorators would all be arriving by 10:30 to begin setting up. They would be walking into a dark, unair-conditioned house in the middle of a humid Georgia afternoon. The representative confirmed the date and time, completely finalizing the order, one utility down. Next, I called the County Water and Sewer Authority. The process was almost identical. I verified my identity, bypassed their security questions with ease, and requested an immediate shutoff at the street level. I specifically asked them to place a physical padlock on the water meter to ensure the tenants could not just walk outside with a wrench and turn the valve back on themselves. Without water, there would be no flushing toilets for the 50 guests Brittany had invited. There would be no running sinks for the expensive catering company to wash their produce. The custom marble kitchen would be completely useless. The representative processed the request, confirming that a county technician would be dispatched early Saturday morning to lock the meter. I did not stop there. I was methodically burning down every comfort they had stolen. I dialed the natural gas provider and ordered a hard disconnect. I called the high-speed internet provider. Brittany loved to document every second of her fake, luxurious life for her followers. She had bragged about the house having gigabit fiber internet to support all her smart home devices and streaming needs. I canceled the plan entirely, wiping the router remotely so that her smart lights, her security cameras, and her aesthetic TikTok videos would all instantly drop offline. Within 45 minutes, I had systematically stripped the $860,000 mansion of every modern necessity. DeAndre and Brittany were currently living in a beautiful brick box that was about to become completely uninhabitable. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and took a deep breath. A dark, deeply satisfying sense of anticipation washed over me. For my entire life, my parents had demanded that I make myself smaller to accommodate Brittany's ego. They had constantly asked me to sacrifice my own comfort so she could shine. Now she was going to experience exactly what it felt like to be left entirely in the dark. I put my car in gear and pulled away from the curb. The federal agents were building the criminal case and the utility companies were handling the infrastructure. But I still had one more legal weapon at my disposal as the legitimate property owner, and it was time to introduce my family to the most ruthless organization in suburban America, the Homeowners Association. A luxury gated community in Alpharetta does not just let anyone live within its walls. They operate under a homeowners association, which essentially functions as a small, highly vindictive local government. People who live in these neighborhoods sign away certain rights in exchange for perfectly manicured lawns and absolute uniformity. As a forensic accountant, I appreciate rules. DeAndre, as a fraudster, clearly thought he was above them. I opened my laptop and searched for the subdivision name listed on my stolen deed. Within seconds, I located the official website for the property management company overseeing the neighborhood. I found the direct phone number for the president of the Homeowners Association, a woman named Beverly. I dialed the number, and she answered on the second ring with a clipped professional tone that demanded respect. I introduced myself as Stella, the legal owner of the property on Oakwood Trace. I explained that I had recently discovered some severe compliance issues regarding my property and needed to speak with her immediately. Beverly's tone shifted from professional to highly attentive. If there is one thing a suburban HOA president loves, it is a compliance issue. I asked Beverly to email me the complete neighborhood bylaws along with the covenant's conditions and restrictions. While she was pulling up my property file, I dropped the first major obstacle onto DeAndre's lap. I informed her that the people currently residing inside my house, DeAndre and Brittany, were unauthorized tenants. I stated clearly that I had never signed a lease agreement with them, and they had bypassed the mandatory community background check required for all non-owner occupants. Beverly gasped audibly over the phone. In luxury-gated communities, unauthorized and unvetted occupants are treated like a severe security threat. She immediately cited Section 4 of the neighborhood bylaws, which stated that unapproved renters subject the homeowner to a fine of $500 per day. I told her I fully supported the strict enforcement of this rule. I requested that she officially classify them as unauthorized occupants and begin levying the maximum daily fine immediately. But I was not finished. I brought up the TikTok video Brittany had posted of her custom nursery. In her desperation to boast about her fake wealth, my sister had explicitly pointed out the new custom arched windows they had installed to let in more natural light for the baby. Changing the exterior facade of a house in a strict HOA requires months of detailed applications, contractor vetting, and explicit approval from the Architectural Review Board. I described the custom exterior window modifications to Beverly. I asked if any architectural review forms had been submitted or approved for my property. I could hear the furious, aggressive clicking of her keyboard. Beverly confirmed that no permits had been approved. She sounded genuinely outraged. Modifying the exterior of a luxury home without the association's blessing is considered a cardinal sin in suburban America. She rattled off the penalties without hesitation. There would be an immediate fine of $2,000 for unauthorized construction, plus a daily fine of $200 until the exterior was fully restored to its original approved condition. I authorized her to levy every single maximum penalty available under the bylaws. I told her I wanted the neighborhood rules enforced to the absolute fullest extent. Then came the final, most crucial detail. Beverly asked where she should mail the violation notices and the rapidly mounting invoices. When DeAndre forged the loan documents, he used my parents' address as his secondary mailing address and guarantor location. He did this hoping to intercept any physical bank mail before it ever reached my actual apartment. He thought he was being clever. I gave Beverly my parents' home address. I told her to send all official HOA correspondence certified letters and daily fine invoices directly to Richard and Patricia. Let the Homeowners Association bury them in certified paperwork. The devastating beauty of HOA fines in the state of Georgia is that they attach directly to the property as a legally binding lien. If the federal authorities somehow missed DeAndre, the HOA had the legal authority to foreclose on the house themselves over unpaid fines. He was now trapped in a web of bureaucratic financial ruin that he could not manipulate or charm his way out of. I thanked Beverly for her diligent service to the community. She eagerly promised to send the community enforcement officer to the property that very afternoon to photograph the unapproved windows and personally serve the first round of violation notices. I ended the call and closed my laptop. The infrastructure was entirely severed. The federal agents were actively securing the criminal warrants. The neighborhood association was about to descend upon them with maximum financial hostility. I had effectively placed my sister and her husband under a complete siege. All I had to do now was wait for the panic to set in. The wait did not last long. Thursday afternoon, my cell phone vibrated violently on the kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I stood there for a moment, watching the screen illuminate the dark marble of my counter. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the glass to answer. I did not say hello. I just listened to the chaotic breathing on the other end of the line. Patricia's voice came through the speaker, but the arrogant, dismissive tone she had used at the restaurant and in her sunroom was completely eradicated. She was hyperventilating, her words tumbling out in a frantic, high-pitched rush. "Stella, what did you do? You need to fix this right now. You are going way too far with this nonsense." "Fix what, Mom?" I asked, my voice as flat and unreadable as a concrete wall. "The mail carrier just dropped off a massive stack of certified letters at our house," Patricia cried, her voice cracking with genuine panic. "They are from the Homeowners Association for Brittany's neighborhood. They are demanding thousands of dollars in fines for unapproved construction and unauthorized occupants. Why are they sending this to our house?" "Stella, and why does it say a lien is going to be placed on the property if the fines are not paid by the end of the week?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter taste. "Because DeAndre used your home address as the secondary guarantor location when he forged the federal loan documents," I explained calmly. "He needed a clean address to intercept any physical bank mail so I would not see it. He actively attached your property to his fraud. And since the Homeowners Association is legally bound to notify the guarantor of any severe neighborhood violations, they are simply following protocol. DeAndre broke the strict neighborhood bylaws, and now the neighborhood is holding him financially accountable." Patricia gasped, the terrifying reality of the certified paperwork finally penetrating her thick wall of denial. But that is not even the worst part, she continued, her panic escalating into pure hysteria. DeAndre went to the bank this morning to wire the final payment to the catering company for the party on Saturday. The teller told him his accounts are restricted. He cannot access his business accounts, his personal checking, or his savings. Everything is locked. He cannot even buy groceries right now. My heart gave a heavy, satisfying thump. Special Agent Harrison and the Criminal Investigation Unit of the Tax Authority had moved exponentially faster than I anticipated. Before executing a major federal raid, The government routinely freezes all liquid assets tied to a racketeering suspect to prevent them from transferring the stolen funds offshore. The trap was springing shut. Stella, I know you are angry, my mother pleaded, her voice dropping to a desperate shaking whisper. But you are a computer person. You work in finance. I know you did some tech thing to freeze his money and generate these fake fines just to scare them. Please, you have made your point. You terrified everyone. Brittany is incredibly stressed right now, and it is not good for the baby. Just undo whatever computer trick you did so DeAndre can pay the vendors. We will talk about the house next week, I promise. I closed my eyes for a brief second, genuinely marveling at her absolute inability to grasp the severity of the situation. She still thought this was a petty sibling rivalry. She honestly believed that I had hacked a major financial institution from my living room laptop just to ruin my sister's weekend dinner party. Mom, I did not hack anything, I said, enunciating every single word so there could be no misunderstanding. I do not have the power to freeze a commercial bank account. Do you know who does have that power? The federal government. There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her ragged breathing. I am the legal owner of that house. I continued, my voice chillingly calm. I reported unauthorized squatters to the neighborhood association. That was my right. As for DeAndre and his frozen accounts, that has absolutely nothing to do with me pressing buttons on a keyboard. When you commit multi-million-dollar wire fraud and steal the equity of elderly homeowners, the Department of Justice tends to notice. They have frozen his assets because he is the primary target of a massive federal racketeering investigation. No. Patricia whispered, her denial violently kicking back in. No, that is impossible. DeAndre is a professional broker. He said it was just a minor paperwork error. He lied to you, Mom. Just like he lied to the bank, and just like he lied to the state notary. I warned you on Monday that he was a criminal. You chose to ignore me. You chose to use my grandfather's money to hire a defense attorney for him. You chose to protect his stolen kitchen island over my career and my future. Stella. Please, my mother started sobbing openly now, the sound echoing harshly through the phone. What are we going to do? The party is in 2 days. People are flying in from out of town. The caterers are threatening to cancel. If I were you, I would tell those people to cancel their flights, I replied coldly. And I would suggest you and Dad start looking for a very good bankruptcy lawyer for yourselves. When the federal agents finish seizing DeAndre's assets, they are going to look very closely at the people who funded his legal defense. I hung up the phone. I did not wait for her to respond or beg for mercy. The panic I had predicted was now fully realized. They were trapped inside a burning house of their own making, and the fire had just reached my parents' front porch. The adrenaline from the phone call carried me through the rest of Thursday. By nightfall, the thick, humid Atlanta air had turned the city into an absolute sauna. Since my car was still stranded at the restaurant valet and my bank accounts remained entirely frozen, I had been forced to rely on the city transit system. I got off the bus a few blocks from my apartment building and walked the rest of the way. I was exhausted, but my mind was still racing with financial flowcharts and legal statutes. To avoid the main lobby where the night concierge always insisted on making unnecessary small talk, I decided to enter my building through the underground parking garage. The concrete cavern was dimly lit, echoing with the low hum of the ventilation fans. I swiped my electronic key fob at the heavy pedestrian door and stepped inside. The moment the metal door clicked shut behind me, a tall figure stepped out from the shadows of a concrete pillar. It was DeAndre, but he looked absolutely nothing like the smug, tailored professional who had mocked me at the luxury restaurant just a few nights ago. His expensive designer suit jacket was missing, his dress shirt was heavily wrinkled, his tie was pulled completely loose around his neck, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked exactly like what he was, a cornered, desperate animal watching his entire empire collapse. You think you are so smart, he spat, his voice echoing sharply in the empty, hollow garage. He closed the distance between us in a matter of seconds. I instinctively took a step back, but my shoulders hit the cold cinder block wall. He lunged forward and slammed his hand against the concrete right next to my head, effectively trapping me. He smelled heavily of stale sweat and cheap whiskey. The arrogant facade was entirely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. "What did you tell the bank, Stella?" he demanded, his breath hot and ragged against my face. "My accounts are frozen. The property management company is breathing down my neck with massive fines. Patricia just called me screaming about federal agents. What exactly did you do?" I did not flinch. I kept my posture straight and my expression completely neutral. "I did not do anything to your accounts, DeAndre," I replied evenly. "You did this to yourself when you stole my identity. And you sealed your own fate when you stole from Harold Jenkins and Margaret Sullivan." The mention of the elderly victims' names hit him like a physical blow. The aggressive, intimidating posture faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of genuine, absolute terror. He did not realize I had dug that deep into his portfolio. He honestly thought I only knew about my own forged mortgage application. He suddenly realized that I had unraveled his entire $6 million criminal network. He recovered quickly, his sheer desperation morphing into violent rage. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a crumpled stack of legal papers. He shoved them aggressively against my chest. "I am not going down for this," he growled, his voice vibrating with anger. "This is a quitclaim deed. It legally transfers the title of the Alpharetta house directly from your name to my limited liability company. You are going to sign it right now, and then you are going to call the police and tell them you made a mistake." His logic was completely fractured by panic. "If I own the house, it is not identity theft anymore," he ranted, practically spitting the words at me. "I can liquidate the property. I can pay off the vendors for the party. I can unfreeze my accounts and hire a lawyer. Sign the paper, Stella, or I swear you will not walk out of this garage." He pressed his heavy forearm against my collarbone, pinning me harder against the cinder block wall. The physical threat was no longer implied. It was immediate, present, and incredibly real. He was a desperate man, watching his lavish lifestyle evaporate into thin air, and he was entirely willing to hurt me to get his way. I looked down at the crumpled quitclaim deed pressed against my chest. Even in his blind panic, he was still trying to commit real estate fraud. A deed signed under physical duress in a dark parking garage without a licensed notary public present was completely useless. It proved just how incredibly little he actually understood about the financial laws he had been breaking for years. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the rapid beating of my heart. "And even if I did sign it, it would not magically unfreeze your bank accounts. The federal government does not care who owns the house today. They care that you committed wire fraud and racketeering to get it last month. You are done, DeAndre." "Shut up!" he roared, raising his free hand, clenched into a tight fist, as if he was about to strike me across the face. "You are going to sign it. You are ruining my life. Do you know how much pressure your sister puts on me? She wanted the marble countertops. She wanted the $30,000 nursery. Your parents expected me to provide a lifestyle I could not afford. I did what I had to do to survive in this greedy family, and you are not going to take it all away from me." I held my ground, staring directly into his bloodshot eyes without blinking. He thought he had me completely isolated and helpless in a dark, empty garage. He thought his physical intimidation and violent threats would finally break the forensic accountant who had just dismantled his entire criminal operation. But once again, DeAndre was severely underestimating my preparation. I did not need to fight him off. I just needed him to keep talking. When I first stepped into the underground garage and saw the shadows moving, I did not freeze out of fear. I stopped to press the side button on my phone, instantly activating the voice recording app I had queued up during my bus ride. Furthermore, when DeAndre cornered me, I intentionally took a step back so that my shoulders hit the cinder block wall directly beneath the glare of the property management's high-definition security camera. I knew the exact blind spots of this garage, and I made absolutely sure we were standing dead center in the camera's field of view. "Are you threatening to physically harm me over a fraudulent real estate deed?" I asked, speaking clearly and loudly enough for the microphone in my blazer pocket to pick up every single syllable. "I am telling you that you are not going to ruin my life and just walk away. DeAndre snarled, stepping even closer, his fists still clenched. Sign the paper right now, Stella. I will make you regret it if you fight me on this. I know where you live. I know where you work. You are not safe from me. That was exactly the phrase I needed. I reached into my pocket, but I did not pull out a pen to sign his ridiculous document. I pulled out my phone. The screen was glowing bright white in the dim garage, clearly displaying the audio recording app with the time code ticking past 3 minutes. This entire conversation is already backed up to a secure cloud server, I said, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. And if you look up and slightly to your left, you will notice the 24-hour security camera pointed directly at your face. If you touch me, or if you do not step away from me this exact second, I will hit a panic button that automatically dispatches the police to this garage. DeAndre froze. His eyes darted from my phone screen up to the blinking red light of the security camera mounted on the concrete ceiling. The blind rage in his face vanished instantly, replaced by the sickening realization that he had just committed another massive unforced error. He backed away slowly, his hands raised defensively. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He turned and practically sprinted toward the exit ramp, his footsteps echoing wildly in the dark. I did not go to sleep that night. I contacted my building manager, explained the situation, and secured a digital copy of the garage surveillance footage by sunrise. On Friday morning, while DeAndre was likely frantically trying to figure out how to pay his party vendors with frozen bank accounts, I walked into the county courthouse. I bypassed the civil division entirely and headed straight for the magistrate clerk to file a petition for an emergency ex parte restraining order. In the state of Georgia, stalking and extortion accompanied by a credible threat of physical violence are grounds for immediate protection. When I stood before the judge in his private chambers, I did not have to rely on emotional testimony. I simply played the crisp, clear audio of DeAndre cornering me, demanding I sign over an $860,000 asset and threatening my physical safety. I handed the judge the printed screenshots from the security camera showing a physically imposing man pinning me against a wall. The judge did not hesitate. He signed the emergency protective order immediately. As the clerk handed me the officially stamped documents, I read the standard conditions printed on the thick legal paper. DeAndre was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my physical person. He was barred from coming near my place of employment. And most importantly, he was explicitly barred from coming within 500 feet of my residence, or any property legally owned by me. Any property legally owned by me. DeAndre had purposely put the Alpharetta mansion entirely in my name to shield himself from liability. The deed was registered strictly to Stella. On paper, it was my absolute property. Therefore, by the stroke of a judge's pen, DeAndre was instantly and legally banished from his own home. Standard eviction procedures can take weeks or even months of tedious civil litigation, but a temporary protective order is immediate and enforced by the threat of instant incarceration. If DeAndre stepped foot on the driveway of that house, he was committing a criminal violation of a court order. I walked out of the courthouse and handed the stamped documents directly to the sheriff's deputy assigned to serve the order. I provided the deputy with DeAndre's office address, knowing he would likely be there trying to salvage his imploding brokerage firm. It was Friday afternoon. Brittany's massive catered housewarming extravaganza was scheduled to begin in less than 24 hours. Her power was scheduled to be cut. Her water was about to be padlocked. The neighborhood association was preparing to hit them with thousands of dollars in property liens. And now, the host of the party was legally prohibited from even walking through his own front door. I sat in a coffee shop across from the courthouse sipping an iced latte completely at peace. The dominoes were perfectly aligned. All I had to do now was show up to the party and watch them fall. I finished the last drop of my iced latte and threw the plastic cup into the trash bin. The restraining order was a brilliant tactical strike, but it only solved half of the problem. It legally banished DeAndre from the property, but Brittany was still sitting inside my $860,000 mansion. She was likely finalizing her extravagant catering menus, arranging expensive floral centerpieces, and completely ignoring the fact that her husband was a wanted criminal. I needed her out, and I needed it done with the same ruthless legal precision I had used on DeAndre. I pulled out my phone and searched for the most aggressive real estate litigation attorney in the Atlanta metropolitan area. I did not want a friendly family lawyer who would suggest mediation. I wanted a shark. I found a senior partner named Gregory Lawson, a man infamous in corporate circles for destroying fraudulent leases and swiftly removing illegal squatters. I called his office, explained that I was the victim of a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud, and secured an emergency consultation for that exact afternoon. Within an hour, I was sitting in Gregory's sleek glass-walled office overlooking the downtown skyline. I slid my thick manila folder across his polished mahogany desk. It contained the county deed proving I was the sole legal owner of the property, the forged mortgage application, the revoked notary logs, and the freshly stamped emergency restraining order against DeAndre. Gregory reviewed the documents in absolute silence. His eyes darted across the pages, absorbing the sheer audacity of the fraud. When he finally looked up, he had a sharp, predatory smile on his face. "Let me make sure I understand this perfectly," Gregory said, folding his hands together. "Your brother-in-law forged a massive jumbo loan to buy a luxury estate, but to hide his tracks, he put the property deed entirely in your name. He essentially bought you a house with stolen bank money." "Exactly," I replied. And now Gregory continued tapping the protective order. "He is legally barred from stepping foot on any property you own under the threat of immediate arrest. That means he cannot go home, which leaves your sister sitting alone in a house she does not own, with no lease agreement, paying no rent, and holding no utility accounts in her name." I nodded. "What is her legal status?" Gregory leaned back in his heavy leather chair. "In the state of Georgia, she is not a tenant, she is a trespasser. Legally speaking, your sister and her husband are nothing more than high-end squatters. Normally, evicting a family member can be a messy process that drags out for weeks because courts favor 30-day notices. However, because we have documented federal fraud, an active restraining order involving physical threats, and a total lack of any written lease, we can bypass the standard waiting period. We are going to file an emergency expedited eviction notice." I paid Gregory his retainer fee using a backup corporate credit card I kept strictly separate from the personal accounts DeAndre had poisoned. Gregory wasted no time. His paralegals immediately drafted an emergency dispossessory warrant. They filed the paperwork with the county magistrate court, arguing that the occupant was an unauthorized squatter, directly tied to a suspect in an active federal racketeering investigation who had just threatened the legal owner with violence. Judges absolutely do not play games when physical threats and federal financial crimes are mixed into property disputes. Gregory pushed the paperwork through the emergency docket with aggressive efficiency. Late Friday afternoon, as the heavy Georgia humidity began to settle over the city, my phone rang. It was Gregory. His voice was brisk and strictly business. "The judge signed the emergency eviction order," Gregory announced. "The county sheriff's department has officially processed the warrant. They are legally authorized to forcibly remove any unauthorized occupants and their personal belongings from the premises." "When will they execute the warrant?" I asked, my heart beating with steady, calculated anticipation. Gregory checked his schedule with the local precinct. "The civil division is fully booked this afternoon, so they have scheduled the execution for tomorrow. The deputies will arrive at the property on Saturday at exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon." I closed my eyes and allowed a genuine smile to spread across my face. Brittany's massive luxury housewarming party and gender reveal extravaganza was explicitly scheduled to begin at noon. By 1 o'clock, that stolen mansion would be completely packed with 50 guests, expensive caterers, and my enabling parents. It was the absolute perfect storm. I thanked Gregory and hung up the phone. The clock was officially ticking. DeAndre was locked out of his bank accounts and banned from his own home. Brittany was sitting in a house with no electricity, no water, and an impending police raid she knew absolutely nothing about. The stage was set for the ultimate destruction of their fake empire, and I had a front row seat. I had a front row seat. I had barely made it back to my apartment and unlocked the front door when my cell phone rang again. It was a blocked caller ID. Usually, I ignore restricted numbers, but given the massive amount of legal and federal machinery I had set into motion, I swiped the screen to answer. Stella, this is Special Agent Harrison from the White Collar Crime Division, a familiar, crisp voice said over the line. I am sitting here with my boss, the special agent in charge of the Financial Crimes Unit for the Southeast region. He wants to speak with you. There was a brief rustling sound before a deeper, more gravelly voice came through the speaker. Stella, my name is Thomas Reynolds. I have been with the Bureau for 22 years, and I have to tell you, I have never seen a civilian hand deliver a prosecution file quite like the one you dropped on our desks Tuesday morning. Thank you, Agent Reynolds, I replied, setting my keys down on the kitchen counter. I take my profession very seriously, and I take identity theft even more seriously. Reynolds let out a short, admiring laugh. We can see that. My team has spent the last 48 hours verifying every single data point, bank, routing number, and forged signature in your dossier. It is absolutely bulletproof. But here is the part you did not know. We have actually had DeAndre and his brokerage firm on our radar for the last 10 months. I leaned against the counter, suddenly intensely focused. You knew he was scamming people. We knew there was an abnormal pattern of wealth transfer targeting elderly homeowners in the Atlanta area, Reynolds corrected. We suspected his firm was the common denominator, but DeAndre was incredibly careful about insulating himself. He used encrypted servers for the shell companies and kept the fraudulent loan documents locked inside the firm's internal network. We could not get a federal judge to sign a search warrant because we lacked the specific internal paper trail to prove probable cause. It was a completely closed loop. Until he got greedy and stole the identity of a forensic accountant, I finished for him. Exactly. Reynolds said, his voice hardening with professional satisfaction. By using your old laptop and fabricating an employment history for you, using his own junior brokers, he accidentally connected his physical office directly to the fake logistics company. Your dossier gave us the smoking gun. The United States Attorney reviewed your file this morning. We just secured federal arrest warrants for DeAndre Jamal Davis and 4 other accomplices. We also secured asset forfeiture warrants for all of their bank accounts and physical properties. A wave of immense relief washed over me. The system was actually working. When are you moving in? I asked. That is why we are calling, Reynolds replied. We are executing a coordinated raid. We are going to hit the brokerage firm, his associates' homes, and the Alpharetta property simultaneously, so they cannot warn each other to destroy evidence. We plan to move tomorrow afternoon. We understand from your file that there is a large event happening at the house. We want to make sure we catch DeAndre on the premises. Do you know what time the party starts? I smiled. The timing could not possibly be more perfect. The housewarming party officially begins at noon, I informed him. But there is a slight complication. DeAndre might not be inside the house. I filed an emergency protective order against him this morning after he cornered me in a parking garage and threatened me. He is legally banned from the property, and honestly, I am not sure what kind of party it will be because I had the utility companies cut the power and water earlier today. There was a stunned silence on the federal end of the line, and one more thing I added, keeping my tone perfectly casual. Since DeAndre is banned and my sister has no lease, I hired a real estate attorney. The county magistrate judge signed an emergency expedited eviction warrant this afternoon. The county sheriff is scheduled to execute the eviction at the property tomorrow at exactly 1 o'clock. Agent Reynolds let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed through the phone. I could hear Agent Harrison chuckling in the background. Stella Reynolds said, clearly impressed. You are absolutely ruthless. I prefer the term thorough, I replied. Well, let us be thorough together, Reynolds declared. If the county sheriff is rolling up at 1 o'clock to evict your sister, my federal agents will be right behind them to secure the property and arrest DeAndre. If he is banned from the house, He will likely be waiting in his car down the street or trying to sneak in the back door to avoid the neighborhood association. We will cast a net over the entire subdivision. You have handed us the perfect trap. We finalized the tactical timeline. I agreed to meet the federal agents and the local deputies at a staging area just outside the gated community at 12:45 tomorrow. I hung up the phone and looked around my quiet, safe apartment. The trap was no longer just a few unpaid bills and a revoked credit score. The full crushing weight of the United States Department of Justice was about to drop directly onto Brittany's perfect luxury party, and I was going to be standing right there to watch her kingdom fall. Saturday morning broke with a heavy oppressive heat that settled over Atlanta, like a wet blanket. I woke up early feeling an unusual sense of profound calm. Today was not just a family party. Today was an execution of justice. I showered and dressed with the same meticulous care I would use to prepare for a major federal court appearance. I chose a tailored navy blue blazer, sharp trousers, and comfortable flats. If I was going to walk through a crime scene, I was going to look like the professional I was. While sipping my black coffee, I opened my phone and tapped the social media icon. I navigated straight to Brittany's page. Her profile ring was already glowing pink with dozens of new updates. She was completely oblivious to the legal hurricane spinning right off her coastline. I tapped the first video. It was a time-lapse of a massive white event tent being erected in the backyard of the Alpharetta property. The next clip showed a team of florists arranging towering displays of pink and blue hydrangeas around the custom marble kitchen island. Brittany appeared in the following video, her face perfectly contoured, wearing a flowing designer maternity dress. She was holding a mocktail and smiling brightly for the camera. "Happy housewarming and gender reveal day to us," she squealed. "The catering team is here unloading the most amazing spread." DeAndre had to step out to handle a sudden work emergency, but he will be back just in time for the big reveal. I smiled softly at the screen. A sudden work emergency. That was a very creative way of explaining that her husband was legally banned from stepping foot on the driveway under the threat of immediate arrest. He was probably sitting in his car at a nearby gas station, furiously making phone calls to defense lawyers who refused to accept his frozen funds. But Brittany was far too obsessed with the aesthetic of her perfect day to question why her husband had abandoned her on the morning of their massive celebration. I kept my eyes locked on the digital clock in the corner of my laptop screen. It was 9:58. The caterers in her videos were plugging in massive industrial warming ovens preparing to heat the elaborate gourmet appetizers. The heavy-duty air conditioning units for the luxury mansion were working overtime to combat the brutal morning humidity. 9:59. I took another slow sip of my coffee. 10 o'clock. I knew exactly what was happening at that precise second, miles away in the luxury subdivision. The remote disconnect order I had scheduled with the power company hit the automated grid. The massive circuit breakers for the property tripped. In an instant, the heavy hum of the central air conditioning completely stopped. The digital displays on the imported kitchen appliances went black. The music playing through the smart home speakers died. Even the high-speed fiber optic internet router went completely dark, severing the local network. Simultaneously, a county water technician was likely stepping off the curb, pulling a heavy iron wrench from his truck and twisting the main water valve shut before sliding a thick metal padlock through the latch. I refreshed Brittany's page every 5 minutes. It took exactly 20 minutes for the panic to breach her digital facade. Since the internet was dead, she had to upload using cellular data. A new video popped up. The lighting was terrible because the indoor lights were dead. Brittany was standing in the kitchen, fanning herself with a paper plate. Her perfect smile was completely gone, replaced by a mask of intense irritation. "You guys are not going to believe this," she complained to her followers, her voice dripping with annoyance. "Our entire neighborhood grid just blew out. The power is completely gone and the water pressure just dropped to 0. The catering manager is freaking out because he cannot run the warming ovens or wash the prep dishes. This is so unacceptable for a luxury community." I actually laughed out loud in my quiet kitchen. She honestly believed it was a neighborhood outage. She was so insulated by her own entitlement that she never even considered the possibility that the utility companies had intentionally targeted her house. If she had simply looked out her new custom windows, she would have seen her neighbors running their sprinklers and watching television. But the most astounding part of the video was her absolute refusal to accept defeat. "I am not letting the power company ruin my perfect day," she announced, pointing a manicured finger at the camera. "We are pivoting. I told the caterers to move the chafing dishes out to the patio. We are setting up battery-powered fans. The show must go on. The guests are already on their way." The sheer level of delusion was breathtaking. She was sitting inside a stolen house with no electricity, no running water, and a husband hiding from a restraining order. Yet her biggest priority was making sure the aesthetic of the party survived. She was blindly marching her 50 guests straight into a federal raid. I closed the app, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. It was time to go meet the authorities. I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet strip mall just 2 miles outside the iron gates of the Alpharetta subdivision. It was exactly 12:45. The midday heat was punishing baking the asphalt, but I felt completely chilled. Parked at the far end of the lot were 3 large unmarked black SUVs with heavily tinted windows. Idling right next to them were 2 fully marked county sheriff cruisers. I parked my car and walked toward the lead SUV. The driver's side door opened, and Special Agent Reynolds stepped out. He was a tall, imposing man with graying hair and an aura of absolute authority. Special Agent Harrison stepped out of the passenger side holding a thick clipboard. A uniformed county sheriff deputy walked over to join us, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "We have a perimeter team already sitting outside the subdivision," Reynolds said, his voice low and strictly professional. We ran the license plates of the cars parked on the street. DeAndre is not parked in the open, but we have an undercover unit watching the back service road. We believe he is hiding inside a silver sedan parked near the community golf course waiting for the party to get crowded so he can slip through the backyard and avoid your restraining order." The county deputy pulled the emergency eviction warrant from his vest pocket. "My orders are to secure the property and remove the unauthorized occupants," he stated. "If the husband is banned and the wife has no lease, we clear the house. You federal agents can have whoever you want, but the physical property belongs to her." He nodded respectfully in my direction. We synchronized our watches. At 12:55, the convoy rolled out. I got back into my car and followed closely behind the heavy black SUVs. When we reached the main entrance of the gated community, the private security guard took one look at the federal plates. His eyes widened and he immediately raised the barrier without asking a single question. As we turned onto Oakwood Trace, the scene was almost painfully pathetic. A massive white event tent was erected in the backyard of my stolen mansion. Cars belonging to 50 wealthy suburbanites lined the street. The guests were dressed in expensive pastel summer clothes, standing around the driveway and the front lawn fanning themselves aggressively with paper napkins. They were sweating heavily in the brutal Georgia heat because the house had no air conditioning. I could see my parents, Richard and Patricia, standing near the front porch. They were desperately trying to play the roles of proud hosts. Patricia was forcing a strained, terrified smile while handing out lukewarm bottled water from a melting cooler. Richard was frantically arguing with the catering manager on the side patio. The caterers looked absolutely miserable trying to serve expensive hot appetizers from folding tables because the custom Italian marble kitchen was completely dead. At exactly 1 o'clock, the tense, uncomfortable suburban atmosphere shattered. The federal agents did not approach quietly. The 3 black SUVs roared up the street and did not bother to parallel park. The lead SUV swerved aggressively to the right, driving its heavy tires directly onto Brittany's pristine, perfectly manicured front lawn. It crushed a massive bed of expensive pink hydrangeas, tearing up the thick green grass. The second SUV pulled diagonally across the driveway, completely blocking the catering trucks. At the same time, the 2 county sheriff cruisers hit their flashing blue and red lights, parking horizontally across the bottom of the driveway, sealing off the entire property. The party guests froze. The polite chatter instantly died. The silence was immediate and absolute, broken only by the sound of heavy car doors slamming open. Men and women wearing heavy tactical vests with FBI printed in massive yellow letters stepped out of the SUVs. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. At the exact same moment, the uniformed county deputies stepped out of their cruisers. The front door of the mansion swung wide open. Brittany marched out onto the porch holding the skirt of her designer maternity dress. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure fury. She thought this was some kind of elaborate prank or a massive mistake by the catering company. "Get those vehicles off my grass right now," Brittany screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a manicured finger at the federal agents. "You are ruining my landscaping. I am calling the neighborhood security." My mother, Patricia, dropped the water bottles she was holding. They hit the concrete driveway and burst open. Richard grabbed her arm, his face turning completely pale. They saw the yellow FBI letters. They saw the sheriff badges. They knew exactly what this was. I parked my car across the street and stepped out. I walked slowly up the driveway, passing the stunned, whispering guests. The raid had officially begun. I parked my car across the street and stepped out. I walked slowly up the driveway, passing the stunned, whispering guests. The raid had officially begun. Special Agent Harrison led the tactical team past the frozen catering crew and straight toward the heavy wooden gate that opened into the backyard. Before they even reached the latch, the gate burst open from the inside. DeAndre sprinted blindly through the opening. He had clearly seen the flashing blue lights reflecting off the back windows and decided to make a desperate run for the community golf course. He was wearing an expensive tailored linen suit, his face glistening with panic and a heavy sweat. He did not make it 5 steps. "Federal agent, get on the ground right now!" Harrison barked, his voice cutting through the humid air like a gunshot. DeAndre tried to pivot and dodge toward the side yard, but his expensive leather shoes slipped on the wet grass. He tripped over a massive decorative planter filled with expensive pink hydrangeas, sending dirt and broken ceramic exploding across the concrete driveway. He crashed hard onto his stomach. Before he could even attempt to scramble to his feet, 3 heavily armed agents were on top of him. They pinned his arms behind his back with practiced, brutal efficiency. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly across the completely silent lawn. DeAndre Brittany shrieked. Her piercing scream shattered the quiet shock of the assembled guests. She tried to run toward him, her designer maternity dress dragging on the pavement, but a uniformed county deputy stepped firmly into her path, holding out a large hand to block her. "Do not interfere, ma'am," the deputy warned, his tone entirely devoid of sympathy. "Get off him." "Do you know who we are?" Brittany yelled, her face turning a mottled, ugly shade of red. "This is our property. You are ruining my housewarming party. We have guests watching." Special Agent Reynolds walked slowly up the driveway, his gold badge gleaming brightly in the harsh afternoon sunlight. He stopped right next to where DeAndre was pinned against the concrete. Reynolds looked down at the disgraced mortgage broker, then looked up at the crowd of 50 wealthy, affluent party guests who were watching with horrified fascination. A few of the guests had even pulled out their cell phones and were actively recording the entire spectacle. DeAndre Reynolds spoke with a booming, authoritative voice that carried effortlessly across the entire front yard. "You are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are being charged with multiple counts of aggravated identity theft, federal wire fraud, and bank fraud. Furthermore, you are being charged under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act for operating a massive criminal enterprise targeting elderly citizens." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. The wealthy suburbanites, the country club friends, and the business associates who had come to celebrate DeAndre's fake success were now staring at him in absolute disgust. He was not a savvy businessman living the American dream. He was a predator who stole from senior citizens. The public humiliation was absolute, undeniable, and broadcast live to everyone he had ever tried to impress in his entire life. DeAndre kept his face pressed firmly against the concrete, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The arrogant facade he wore so proudly at the luxury restaurant was completely shattered. "Daddy, do something!" Brittany wailed, turning frantically toward our parents. "Tell them to stop. He is a professional broker. He did not do anything wrong." Richard, desperately trying to maintain some semblance of patriarchal control over the rapidly collapsing situation, puffed out his chest and marched toward Special Agent Reynolds. "Now listen here," Richard demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the federal agent. "I am his father-in-law. I demand you release him this instant. This is a massive misunderstanding over a simple family loan. I have a high-priced defense attorney on retainer, and I will sue this entire department for harassment." Reynolds did not flinch. He slowly turned his head to look directly at my father. His expression was as cold and hard as granite. Sir Reynolds said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "The man on the ground orchestrated a $6 million fraud ring. We have absolute proof of his crimes, including the fact that he secretly took out a fraudulent second mortgage on your personal retirement home to cover his tracks. Now, if you take one more step toward my officers, or if you attempt to interfere with a federal arrest in any way, I will personally place you in handcuffs for obstruction of justice and accessory to federal fraud. Do you understand me?" My father stopped dead in his tracks. The color completely drained from his face as the words "second mortgage" registered in his brain. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He slowly lowered his pointing finger and took 3 submissive steps backward, physically retreating from the man he had just tried to intimidate. Brittany watched her father back down, her expression twisting from rage into genuine terror. She looked around wildly, finally locking eyes with me as I stood quietly near the catering trucks. "Stella," she cried out, her voice cracking. "Tell them! Tell them you gave him permission! Tell them it was a mistake!" I looked at my sister taking in her ruined designer dress and her tear-streaked face. "I did not give him permission," I said clearly, ensuring my voice carried to my parents and the remaining guests. "I gave them the evidence." The federal agents hauled DeAndre to his feet and began marching him toward the waiting black SUVs. He kept his head hung in shame, completely broken. The federal portion of the trap had perfectly executed its purpose, but the afternoon was far from over. The FBI had their criminal, but the county sheriff was still holding a piece of paper that belonged to me. The heavy door of the federal vehicle slammed shut, cutting off DeAndre from the world he had tried to build on stolen money. The darkly tinted windows hid him from the gawking crowd of party guests, but the reality of his departure hung heavy over the ruined front lawn. Brittany collapsed to her knees on the concrete driveway, her hands covering her face as she wailed loudly. My mother rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her golden child, glaring at the federal agents who were now systematically cordoning off the perimeter of the property with bright yellow tape. But the flashing lights of the county sheriff cruisers were still spinning, casting harsh red and blue reflections against the brick facade of the mansion. The lead deputy, a broad-shouldered man with a stern, unforgiving expression, adjusted his duty belt and walked deliberately up the driveway. He bypassed the federal agents, who were busy cataloging the luxury vehicles parked near the garage, and stopped directly in front of my sister and my mother. "Ma'am," the deputy said, looking down at Brittany. "Are you Brittany Davis?" She looked up, her expensive mascara running in dark streaks down her flushed cheeks, and nodded weakly. My mother immediately went on the defensive again, her maternal instincts blindly ignoring the massive federal crime scene surrounding them. "Has she not been through enough today?" Patricia snapped, shielding Brittany. "Her husband was just taken away in handcuffs. Have some basic human decency and leave us alone." The deputy did not flinch. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the folded legal document my attorney had secured the day before. He handed it down to Brittany, who took it with trembling fingers. "I am executing a court-ordered emergency dispossessory warrant," the deputy stated clearly, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the remaining crowd. "This property legally belongs to Stella, and you are currently classified as an unauthorized occupant with no valid lease agreement. You are trespassing. You need to vacate the premises immediately." Brittany stared at the paper as if it were written in a completely foreign language. Vacate, she choked out, her voice cracking. This is my house. My baby's nursery is up there. I live here. That was my cue. I stepped away from the catering trucks and walked into the center of the driveway, placing myself squarely in front of my sister and my parents. No, Brittany, I said, my voice steady, cold, and echoing with finality. You do not live here. You have been squatting in a house that was purchased using my stolen identity. The federal government has seized your husband's bank accounts. The neighborhood association is placing a massive lien on the address, and a county judge has officially ordered you off my property. Brittany stared at me, her eyes wide with a chaotic mixture of hatred and absolute disbelief. Where am I supposed to go? She demanded, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. I am pregnant. I have nowhere to live. That sounds like a logistical problem you should have considered before you let your husband forge my signature, I replied, offering zero sympathy. You have exactly 20 minutes to go inside and pack a single suitcase of your personal clothing. That is it. My father, who had been standing silently in shock since his humiliating confrontation with the FBI, suddenly found his voice. A single suitcase, Richard sputtered, his face turning red with indignation. What about her furniture? What about the $30,000 nursery we helped set up? You cannot just keep her belongings, Stella. That is literal theft. I turned my gaze to my father, completely unfazed by his manufactured outrage. Actually, Dad, since the furniture was purchased using the illicit proceeds of a federal wire fraud scheme, it is currently considered criminal evidence. Furthermore, anything permanently attached to the house, like those custom nursery window modifications you were so proud of, legally belongs to the property owner, which is me. If you try to remove a single piece of furniture or an imported marble countertop from my house, I will have the deputy arrest you for theft and destruction of property. The deputy nodded firmly in agreement, resting his hand near his radio. She is absolutely correct. You can take your personal clothes and essential toiletries. Everything else stays exactly where it is until the federal forfeiture investigation is complete. You have 20 minutes starting right now. After that, my officers will physically remove you from the property. Brittany let out another piercing wail, clutching the eviction notice to her chest. She looked around at her party guests, who were now rapidly retreating to their cars, desperate to avoid any association with a federal crime scene. The extravagant caterers were already packing up their chafing dishes, fleeing the powerless house in a panic. The perfect aesthetic she had spent months curating for her social media followers had completely disintegrated in less than 10 minutes. 20 minutes, I reminded her, glancing down at my watch. I suggest you start packing. The temperature is rising rapidly, and without air conditioning, it is only going to get more uncomfortable inside my house. Brittany let out a choked sob, turning on her heel and practically running into the dark, sweltering house to salvage whatever designer clothes she could stuff into a single bag. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, leaving me standing on the concrete driveway with my parents. The flashing lights of the sheriff cruisers painted their pale, horrified faces in alternating shades of red and blue. Patricia lunged forward, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen before. "Are you happy now?" she screamed, her voice hoarse and raw. "You destroyed this family. You were so incredibly jealous of your sister's happiness that you had to burn her entire life to the ground. You are a monster, Stella." Richard stepped up beside her, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, his chest heaving. "We raised you better than this. You could have dropped the charges. You could have let us handle this internally as a family. Instead, you called the FBI. You humiliated us in front of our friends. You threw your pregnant sister onto the street like a stray dog. You are dead to us, Stella. Do you hear me? You are no longer our daughter." I looked at the two people who were supposed to protect me, feeling absolutely nothing. The emotional tether that had tied me to them for 33 years was completely severed. "I did not destroy this family," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air with surgical precision. "DeAndre destroyed it. I just turned on the light so you could see the rot." I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the thick manila folder I had carried with me to the federal building earlier that week. I opened it and extracted a single sheet of paper. It was not a police report, and it was not an eviction notice. It was a certified property record from the county clerk's office. I held the paper out toward my father. Agent Reynolds tried to warn you a few minutes ago, but you were too busy defending a criminal to listen to him. I suggest you read this, carefully. Richard snatched the paper from my hand, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. Patricia leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in angry confusion. I watched as the righteous indignation in my father's eyes slowly morphed into total, unadulterated horror. His hands began to shake so violently that the heavy paper rattled in the quiet afternoon air. "What is this?" Patricia whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at her husband's terrified face. "Richard, what does it say?" "That is a deed of trust," I explained calmly, slipping back into my professional tone as a forensic accountant. When DeAndre realized the massive jumbo loan in my name was going to require substantial cash reserves to pass the initial underwriting, he needed liquid assets fast. But his own money was tied up in his other fraudulent shell companies. So he looked for an easier target. Someone who trusted him completely. Someone who gave him unfettered access to their financial documents and eagerly signed whatever paperwork he put in front of them under the guise of family support. Richard staggered backward, as if he had been physically struck by a heavy blow. "No," he gasped, his face turning an ashen gray. "He said those papers were just character reference affidavits for his renewed brokerage license. He said it was just a background check." "He lied," I said, delivering the final crushing blow without a single ounce of hesitation. DeAndre took out a $400,000 second mortgage on your fully paid-off retirement home. He stripped all the equity you spent 30 years building. And because you willingly gave him your signatures, handed over your social security numbers, and authorized him as your financial representative, the bank considers it a completely valid, legally binding loan. Patricia let out a guttural, agonizing cry. She grabbed my father's arm, her knees buckling beneath her as the reality of the document finally set in. "The federal agent seized all of his assets today." I continued, my voice entirely devoid of comfort or pity, "which means the payments on your new second mortgage are going to default immediately. The bank will foreclose on your home within the year. You gave him your $50,000 savings to hire a defense attorney. You handed him your retirement equity. You willingly sacrificed my career and my future to protect his reputation. And in return, the golden child's husband completely bankrupted you." My parents stood frozen on the driveway of a stolen mansion, the full crushing weight of their absolute ruin silencing them. They had lost their life savings. They had lost their home. They had lost their dignity in front of their entire social circle. There was no one left to blame, no scapegoat left to attack. I looked at them one last time, taking a mental photograph of the exact moment they realized their misplaced loyalty had cost them everything. I turned away from them, walking back toward my car parked across the street. I did not look back when the front door opened and my sister emerged with a single suitcase crying into the humid Georgia air. I started my car engine, the air conditioning blasting a welcome relief against the stifling afternoon heat, and drove away from the subdivision. I left them standing on the driveway, surrounded by the flashing lights of law enforcement and the shattered remnants of their fake empire. That was the absolute last time I ever saw them in person outside of a courtroom. 6 months later, the federal justice system delivered its final crushing verdict. Because of the overwhelming mountain of digital evidence I had provided, and the testimonies of the 6 elderly victims whose lives he had actively tried to ruin, DeAndre did not even attempt to fight the charges. His high-priced defense attorney, the one my parents had paid for, dropped him the moment the federal government froze the retainer funds. DeAndre was forced to use a public defender and ultimately took a plea deal to avoid a massive trial. I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse during his sentencing hearing. He looked completely unrecognizable. The tailored designer suits and the arrogant, sneering smile were gone, replaced by a drab orange jumpsuit and the hollow, terrified eyes of a man who finally understood the consequences of his greed. Harold Jenkins and Margaret Sullivan, 2 of the elderly victims whose equity he tried to steal, sat in the front row watching him face justice. The federal judge did not show a single ounce of leniency. DeAndre was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole and ordered to pay millions in total restitution. When the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, he did not look back at the gallery. Brittany was not in the courtroom to support him. She was entirely preoccupied with her own miserable reality. Without DeAndre's stolen income, and with the neighborhood association placing a massive lien on the Alpharetta property, the bank formally took possession of the house. My parents suffered the exact same fate. Because of the fraudulent second mortgage DeAndre had strapped to their retirement home, they defaulted within weeks. The bank foreclosed, wiping out 30 years of their hard-earned equity. They were forced to file for total Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Today, my family lives in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. The building is notorious for its mold problems, thin walls, and broken elevators. Brittany's social media accounts, once a curated feed of fake luxury and arrogant bragging, were permanently deleted the day the eviction happened. The influencers and wealthy friends she tried so desperately to impress abandoned her instantly. She is now a single mother to a newborn baby, completely stripped of the lavish lifestyle she believed was her birthright. There is no $30,000 custom nursery. Her baby sleeps in a second-hand crib squeezed into the corner of a tiny room she shares with my parents. Richard and Patricia, who had spent their entire lives cultivating an image of affluent suburban superiority, are now facing the harsh reality of extreme poverty at 65 years old. To keep the lights on and buy groceries, they were both forced out of retirement. The stress has aged them both a decade in a matter of months. My father, who used to boast about his country club membership, now works the early morning shift, stocking heavy boxes at a massive discount retail store. My mother, who once looked down on anyone who did not wear designer labels, spends her days standing behind a cash register at a local pharmacy scanning coupons and dealing with angry customers for minimum wage. The most tragic part of their situation is not the loss of money, but the absolute destruction of their relationships. According to the few extended family members who still speak to them, their apartment is a miserable, toxic war zone. They are locked in an endless cycle of vicious blame. Brittany screams at my parents for introducing her to DeAndre and failing to protect her financial future. My parents scream at Brittany for being so demanding and materialistic that she drove her husband to commit federal fraud. They blame the economy, they blame the government, and they blame the banks. The only person they actively avoid blaming is themselves. They sit in their cramped, humid apartment surrounded by the consequences of their own absolute greed and refuse to accept any responsibility. They chose to enable a golden child. They chose to fund a criminal. They chose to sacrifice my future to protect their image. And the universe rewarded their choices with complete and utter ruin. I know all of this because my mother occasionally tries to leave me desperate weeping voicemails from burner phones begging for financial help. She tries to weaponize my niece, claiming the baby is suffering because of my stubbornness. It is the exact same manipulation tactic she used when she demanded I let them steal my credit score. I never answer the calls. I listen to the voicemails once, delete them, and block the numbers. The boundaries I set on that sweltering Saturday afternoon in the driveway are absolute. Because while they were trapped in that miserable cycle, my life took a completely different trajectory. The federal investigation did not just put DeAndre behind bars, it completely vindicated me. About 3 weeks after the dramatic raid at the Alpharetta mansion, I received an official federal decree from the United States Department of Justice, signed directly by a federal judge. This document legally declared me a victim of aggravated identity theft and completely voided the fraudulent $860,000 jumbo loan. I forwarded the decree to the major credit bureaus, and within 48 hours, the catastrophic damage to my financial profile was completely erased. My credit score shot right back up to a pristine 810. But the absolute best part of the legal fallout was the house itself. Since DeAndre had been arrogant enough to place the property deed entirely in my name, and because I had been the key informant who handed the FBI their entire racketeering case on a silver platter, the federal prosecutors and Chase Bank came to a unique agreement with my attorney. The bank did not want to go through the lengthy, expensive process of a formal foreclosure and federal asset seizure. Instead, they recognized my legal ownership of the property and allowed me to put the mansion on the market through a traditional real estate agent. The housing market in that exclusive Alpharetta subdivision had surged over the past year. When we finally closed the sale, the property did not just sell for the original loan amount. It sparked a massive bidding war and sold for over $1 million. After paying off the remaining balance of the voided mortgage, clearing the neighborhood association liens and covering the realtor fees, the remaining equity belonged entirely to me. I walked away from my sister's stolen dream home with a cashier's check for $150,000 in pure, untaxed profit. DeAndre tried to steal my future, and instead he accidentally handed me a massive financial windfall. My professional life experienced an equally spectacular resurrection. The day after my credit score was officially restored, I walked back into the towering glass atrium of my accounting firm. My security badge glowed a welcoming green when I swiped it at the executive elevator. When I stepped onto the 42nd floor, David, the director of compliance, and the head of human resources were waiting for me. There was no cold conference room this time. They formally apologized for my suspension and presented me with a brand new contract. Because of the incredible investigative skills I demonstrated in single-handedly dismantling a multi-million-dollar federal racketeering ring, the firm did not just give me my job back. They promoted me. I was officially named the new director of fraud investigation, complete with a massive corner office and a life-changing salary increase. I used the $150,000 profit from the house sale as a massive cash down payment on a stunning luxury condominium in the heart of downtown Atlanta. I did not need fake marble countertops or a ridiculous backyard tent to prove my worth. I had a breathtaking view of the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows, and absolute financial security. This morning, the sun was shining brightly over the city. I was standing on my private balcony, wearing a comfortable silk robe, sipping a freshly brewed cup of premium coffee. The city below was bustling with life, but up here everything was perfectly quiet. My phone buzzed on the patio table next to me. I picked it up and glanced at the screen. It was another restricted number. My mother. I let it go to voicemail just out of sheer curiosity. A minute later, the audio file popped up. I tapped play. "Stella, please?" Patricia's voice echoed softly from the speaker. She sounded exhausted, defeated, and incredibly old. "We are struggling so much. Brittany cannot afford diapers, and your father's back is giving out from the heavy lifting at the warehouse. We know you sold the house. We know you have money. Please, you have to help us. We are family." I listened to her desperate pleas, but I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel anger or sadness or even pity. I just felt completely indifferent. I tapped the screen, deleted the voicemail, and permanently blocked the new restricted number. I set my phone face down on the table, picked up my coffee mug, and took a slow, satisfying sip. I looked out over the beautiful Atlanta skyline and smiled. They say living well is the best revenge. They are absolutely right. The ultimate revenge is not screaming or arguing or trying to make them understand their mistakes. The ultimate revenge is my absolute peace, my massive success, and the beautiful, quiet life I built entirely on my own. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to cut ties with a toxic family to protect your own peace and future, let me know in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, boundaries, and ultimate karma. Remember, your worth is never defined by the people who fail to appreciate you. Keep fighting for your own success, and never let anyone steal your identity. The chilling saga of Stella and her family serves as a powerful testament to one of the hardest truths we must learn in life. Shared DNA does not entitle anyone to your destruction, and family loyalty should never be used as a shield for toxic or criminal behavior. From a young age, society conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water, urging us to forgive the unforgivable in the name of keeping the peace. Stella's parents weaponized this exact sentiment. They demanded she silently accept the theft of her identity, her career, and her financial future, all to preserve the fragile illusion of her sister's perfect life. However, the profound lesson here is that true family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, accountability, and love, not extortion. When a family member demands that you set yourself on fire simply to keep them warm, walking away is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of essential self-preservation. Stella's ultimate triumph was not just watching the federal authorities dismantle her brother-in-law's fraudulent empire, nor was it walking away with a massive financial windfall. Her greatest victory was the absolute unshakable boundary she established the moment she realized her parents chose to fund a criminal rather than protect their innocent daughter. We must normalize cutting ties with toxic relatives who manipulate, use, and abuse us under the guise of familial duty. Peace of mind is infinitely more valuable than a seat at a toxic dinner table. You are entirely within your rights to protect your peace, your assets, and your future, even if the threat comes from the people who raised you. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own well-being, please share your journey in the comments below.